The evening of October 12th, 2011. Daniel Wright, a 34-year-old field biologist at the University of Washington, is methodically preparing for a solo expedition to Mount Rainier. 20 hours later, he will disappear without a trace on the eastern Tahoma Range. 13 years later, a drone would record a perfect circle of human bones in an inaccessible canyon, the remains of a man who knew the mountain trails too well to simply get lost. Daniel went through his gear in the living room of his apartment in Seattle at 2230, methodically stacking each item into his tattered khaki expedition backpack, with numerous patches, silent witnesses to his past travels. The television in the corner of the room muttered the weather forecast. Cool but clear day expected in the Cascade Mountains area. The mountains are where I feel truly alive, where I can finally hear my own thoughts, he had written in an email to his sister Emily the night before. Planning to spend 5 days in the eastern part of Mount Rainier National Park to study a rare species of high-altitude lichens. One last message sent to a woman who would soon begin the longest and most agonizing wait of her life. On the table next to a picture of his late parents, they died in a car accident when he was 22, lay a waterproof leather-bound notebook with notes from previous expeditions, a carefully calibrated Garmin GPS unit with maps of the area loaded, a copper compass inherited from his geologist grandfather, a professional Canon camera with a telephoto lens for documenting samples, and an old silver cigarette case in which Daniel kept not cigarettes, but rare plant seeds found on previous expeditions. 1, 2, 3, 4, he whispered, going through the packets of dry rations. It was his tradition to recite aloud each stage of preparation. A psychologist who worked with the search team would later remark, "This habit is characteristic of people with a high level of organization." Daniel was not a person prone to spontaneous decisions or carelessness. A colleague at the university, Dr. Sarah Lang, would later recall, Daniel was an incredibly methodical researcher, always triple-checking his equipment and itinerary, which makes his disappearance particularly puzzling. A man of his experience should not have just gone missing. On the eve of his departure, he had stopped by the lab to check the meteorological data. There was nothing to portend trouble. A police report 4 days after the disappearance mentions a strange detail. A neighbor of Daniel's, Mrs. Clayton, while walking her dog around midnight, noticed a male figure standing under the windows of his apartment. "I didn't think much of it," she told Detective Morrison. "There are men walking around in our neighborhood a lot. But now, looking back, I remember that it was like the man didn't move, just stood there and looked up." Before leaving, Daniel made one last entry in his personal journal at 5:15 on the morning of October 13th. "Strange dream last night. Someone was watching my training through the window. The feeling of being chased never leaves me. But the mountains are waiting, and I have always found comfort in their ancient indifference to human anxiety." These lines would not be discovered by investigators until 3 weeks later, when the official search would already have ended inconclusively. In the bag was a small flask of whiskey, another tradition inherited from his grandfather. "A sip for courage and a swig for the mountains," the old man liked to say. Daniel wasn't a big fan of alcohol, but he kept this family tradition as a kind of ritual before every serious expedition. The ringing of the phone interrupted his methodical preparation. Emily, the 15th call of the day. His sister's anxiety always increased before his treks. "It's okay, Em. Yeah, the tracker's working. Yes, I'll be in touch twice a day. No, the route is well researched. Daniel ended the conversation by going through the contents of the first aid kit: Band-Aids, antiseptic, anti-inflammatories, analgesics, bandages, tourniquets, all in their places. On the wall above his desk hung a map of the park, with red markers of the places where he'd already collected specimens, and a blue route through the rugged east side of the Tahoma Range. The same route Daniel would never return from. He pulled a Polaroid camera, a technical anachronism in the age of digital cameras, out of his desk drawer and snapped a picture of his desk. Another tradition: capture the preparations to compare later with the results of the expedition. 13 days later, this photo would become the first piece of evidence in a folder labeled Missing Persons. The forecast is steady, less than 15% chance of precipitation, he noted in his notebook, checking the Weather Service data on his tablet. Daniel believed in the power of documentation. Every hike started with a detailed plan and ended with a detailed report. There would be no report this time. Throwing one last glance at the wall with the map, he walked to the window. The streetlights cast long shadows on the asphalt, wet from the evening rain. A strange feeling lingered in his mind, the sensation of someone else's gaze, directed from the street right into his window. Daniel pulled back the curtain and peered into the darkness. Nothing. Just an empty street and the flickering lights of the city. Professional deformity, he grinned. Spend too much time alone in the woods, you start to feel a presence where there isn't one. At 6 sharp, the alarm clock woke him. Shower, breakfast, one last gear check. At 7:10, Daniel Wright got into his blue Subaru Forester and set off toward the mountains, and toward a destiny that 13 years later would manifest itself as a perfect circle of human bones in an inaccessible canyon of Mount Rainier National Park. October 13th, 2011, 7 hours and 12 minutes in the morning. A security camera at the eastern entrance checkpoint to Mount Rainier National Park captures a blue Subaru Forester with a Washington state license plate. The driver is Daniel Wright. 6 hours and 28 minutes later, the first search operation is announced. 2 weeks later, the search will be officially called off. Daniel Wright would become just a statistical unit in a long list of people missing from America's national parks. The morning greeted the biologist with a dense milky white fog, which, according to an entry in the park ranger's weather log, enveloped the trees like ghostly shrouds at 6:45 in the morning. The temperature is 7 degrees Celsius, humidity 92%, visibility less than 50 meters. An atypical weather event for this time of year, noted park meteorologist Alan Perkins. At the checkpoint, Daniel exchanged a few words with the ranger on duty, Thomas Collins, who testified 3 days later. He was in a great mood, joking about how the fog hides all the interesting things, but he has secret trails that only real explorers know about. I suggested he wait for the fog to clear, but he just shook his head and said that nature doesn't have bad weather. Those words would be the last words Daniel Wright would say to another person. Years of experience have taught me one thing: disappearances are never random, Detective Michael Harris, who advised the search team, would later share. There is always a chain of events, actions, or inactions that lead to tragedy. In Daniel Wright's case, that chain began with his decision to walk alone in extremely limited visibility. The last reliably recorded contact with Daniel occurred at the Silver Ridge Beacon at 10:23 in the morning, where his GPS device automatically sent coordinates to the university's server, showing that he had already deviated 2.5 kilometers from his planned route toward the infamous Echo Gully. The system registered no emergency messages. The device continued to operate for another 47 minutes, after which the signal disappeared. The Echo Gully area is notorious among local guides, says William Stern, head of the Mount Rainier Guides Association. 4 people have disappeared there in the last 15 years. The bodies of 2 have never been found. We call the place the Quiet Zone because of the strange acoustic features. Sounds are muffled there, as if absorbed by something. Experienced hikers avoid this route. At 1340, a married couple from Portland, James and Christina Martinez, found an abandoned backpack near Tagliapus Creek, 3 kilometers from Wright's last recorded coordinates. Their statements are recorded in the police report as follows. The contents of the backpack were intact except for an empty camera compartment, and nearby on the wet ground one could see strange parallel furrows, as if something heavy had been dragged through a thicket of ferns. There were no signs of struggle or the presence of large animals around. James Martinez, a former military medic, would later add a detail not included in the official report. I noticed a strange feature. The backpack was lying flat, neatly placed on a flat rock. It didn't look like an accidental fall or panic flight. Someone deliberately placed it so that it would be visible from the trail. The search operation, which began at 1615 the same day, covered an area of 30 square kilometers, involving 2 helicopters with thermal imaging cameras and 8 rescue teams with search dogs. The dogs were behaving strangely, recalls dog handler Samantha Clark. They would pick up the trail, but after a few hundred meters, they would start circling in place and whining. I've never seen that in 15 years of working. The first 2 days of the search yielded no results, but on the 3rd day, a group of volunteers uncovered 2 finds that would make investigators question the accident theory. A broken Canon camera at the base of a cliff 15 meters from the trail, and a grandfather's compass with bloody fingerprints on rocks near Narada Falls, 2 kilometers from where the backpack was found. The pattern of blood distribution on the compass and surrounding rocks is atypical of a fall or animal attack, more like a deliberate pattern, which is highly unusual, noted forensic scientist Jennifer Wu in her preliminary report dated October 17th. The document was classified by her immediate supervisor, Lieutenant Robert Grayson, as insignificant and sent to the archives. We have to make tough decisions every day, Grayson will say at a press conference on October 25th. Resources are limited. Searches cost tens of thousands of dollars a day. Based on the available evidence, we have concluded that Mr. Wright was most likely the victim of an accident. He may have twisted his leg and was unable to get out, or encountered a wild animal. Daniel's sister, Emily Wright, reacted aggressively to this statement. My brother spent more time in the mountains than half of your rangers. He had a GPS, a walkie-talkie, a compass. He knew what to do in an emergency. And you're telling me he just fell and couldn't call for help? What about the bloody prints, and the camera, and the strange grooves on the ground? Why isn't anyone investigating this properly? The next 3 days brought only one additional find. A scrap of map with Daniel's notes attached to a tree trunk with bottle glass shaped like an arrowhead. That map fragment couldn't have been there by accident, Emily argued in a meeting with investigators. It's a signal. Daniel is showing us a direction. But this potential clue was also ignored. The official investigation concluded on October 28th, 2011, with the conclusion: probable fatal accident, body presumed to have been carried away by a mountain river or to have fallen prey to predators. Daniel's sister did not accept this conclusion. They just want to close the case, she told a reporter for the local Seattle Times. But I'm not going to stop. Something happened to my brother in those mountains, and I'm going to find out what it is, even if it takes years. What she didn't realize was that the clue wouldn't come until 13 years later, under completely unbelievable circumstances that would shake not only the Wright family, but the entire national park system of America. April 6th, 2024th year, 5 hours and 30 minutes in the morning. Mount Rainier National Park. Documentary filmmaker Marcus Hall climbs up to the Sunrise Point Lookout to launch his drone for a wildlife movie. In 2 hours and 52 minutes, he will be the man who accidentally solves a 13-year-old mystery. A secret buried in an inaccessible canyon where no man has ever set foot. The gray pre-dawn gloom slowly receded, revealing a panorama of mountain ranges. The temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. Wind, 3 meters per second, northwest. Visibility is exceptional. I chose this particular day because of the ideal weather conditions and the lack of tourists, Hall recalls in an interview with National Geographic. I needed footage of wildlife without human presence for my Invisible Trails documentary project. Hall launched his high-tech DJI Phantom 5 drone with a modified thermal imaging camera over the south side of Carbon Canyon. The carbon-black craft with 4 propellers rose silently into the air and headed toward inaccessible rocky areas where park rangers said a small population of rare mountain goats lived. I was flying the drone over a particularly inaccessible section of the canyon at 8:22 in the morning when something appeared on the monitor that caused me to question my own vision, Hall said in an official statement to the Pierce County Police Department. A perfectly round structure of apparent man-made origin was clearly visible among the rocks. Upon closer examination, it appeared to be composed of what appeared to be human bones. Hall's first impulse was to contact the park administration immediately. I couldn't believe my eyes, I thought. Maybe these are some strangely weathered rocks or animal remains. But an inner voice was screaming that I was observing something I wasn't supposed to see, he recalls. Federal Ranger Michael Corbett, who took the call at 9:05 a.m., was initially skeptical of the report. We get dozens of calls about strange finds every month, he says. Usually they're falling trees, shadows from clouds, or natural geologic formations. But when Hall forwarded the drone footage to me, I immediately contacted the sheriff's office. The remains, neatly laid out in a circle exactly 13 feet in diameter, were in a crevice inaccessible to a ground search without special climbing equipment, in the canyon's so-called shadow zone, where sunlight hits less than 2 hours a day. This explained why they remained undiscovered for 13 years. The centerpiece of the composition was a human skull mounted on a makeshift pedestal of crossed tibia bones. In our initial drone inspection of the site, we encountered a phenomenon that defies rational explanation, said Park Search and Rescue Chief Greg Foster. The remains were in a canyon with nearly vertical walls about 80 feet high. The only way to get there was by rappelling with climbing equipment, or by a drop from the top. A special team of speleologists and forensic experts did not reach the discovery site until 2 days later, on April 13th. The operation took 7 hours and required the participation of 16 specialists. The configuration of the remains demonstrates an absolutely impossible natural phenomenon, Dr. Richard Kincaid, Washington State's chief forensic scientist, noted in his report. Not only do the bones form a perfect circle, but they are placed at precise intervals of 13 centimeters between each element. This indicates deliberate placement by a person with a working knowledge of anatomy and geometry. But the real mystery was the physical impossibility of the composition itself. Given the characteristics of the terrain, it is impossible to explain how someone could not only bring the remains to this location, but also place them with such mathematical precision on a nearly vertical surface, geologist Andrew Simmons emphasized in the report. Forensic anthropological analysis, completed on April 23 at 1445, confirmed the worst fears. The remains belonged to Daniel Wright, who disappeared in these mountains 13 years ago. Identification was made on the basis of dental records and a unique fusion of a wrist broken as a child. A detailed study of the skull under an electron microscope revealed multiple impact injuries in the occipital region, caused by an object with an unusual triangular surface containing microparticles of a rare alloy, including titanium, beryllium, and bismuth, a combination used mainly in specialized geological tools, the expert report stated. Inspector Michelle Rodriguez, a 39-year-old FBI Academy graduate with 15 years of experience investigating crimes against persons, led the reopened investigation. Sometimes things happen that seem like coincidences, but are actually the manifestation of a pattern, she noted at the investigation team's first briefing. A drone launched to monitor wildlife discovers human remains exactly 13 years after the disappearance. The remains are laid out in a circle 13 feet in diameter with 13-centimeter gaps. This is no accident. Rodriguez found an unrecorded digital storage device, a damaged SD card from Daniel's camera, in the archived case files from 2011. The card was stored in a plain envelope labeled "Personal Effects, Not Relevant." FBI digital forensic specialists spent 40 hours recovering data from the damaged media. In the periphery of the last image, taken at 12:07, the silhouette of a man with a distinctive scar on the right side of his face, watching Daniel from behind the trees, can be seen in the reflection of the creek behind the rocks, the technical department report read. Upon enlarging and enhancing the image, the computer has identified this man with an 87% probability of being Harold Sheppard, former caretaker of the eastern sector of the park, fired in 2010 after a series of complaints of strange behavior. "We're looking for a man who turned a national park into his personal hunting territory," Rodriguez said in a closed-door meeting with the FBI director. "And I need to understand why 13 years ago no one paid attention to key evidence." In a press release dated April 25th, the Bureau confirmed only one fact. The remains of Daniel Wright, who disappeared in Mount Rainier in the year 2011, have been found. An investigation is underway. But behind those dry words lay the hunt for a man who might have turned the majestic mountains of the Cascade Range into the site of his macabre ritual. May 12th, 2024 year, 8 hours and 35 minutes in the morning. FBI office in Seattle. Inspector Michelle Rodriguez is reviewing Daniel Wright's case file when a phone call changes the course of the investigation. After 13 years, the man who met the alleged killer by chance finally decides to tell his story. The phone breaks into a shrill trill, the kind of sound that in movies often precedes a plot twist. On the line is a man's voice, strained, with a slight Northwest Coast accent. "My name is Aaron Davis. I saw a report about a discovery in Mount Rainier Park. I think I've met the person who made it. We get up to 15 calls like this a day after any publication about a high-profile case," an FBI public affairs officer later tells me. 99% are either mistakes or attempts to draw attention to themselves, but we have an obligation to vet everyone. This call turned out to be that 1%. "I'll never forget that man outside the Mountain Trails hiking store in Ashford," Davis recounted in a shaky voice in a recorded statement made that same day at 14:20. Stocky, with an unusual scar across his right cheek. Upon hearing of my plans to explore the eastern Tahoma Range, he grinned strangely and said, "Some trails only lead one way. I help special travelers become part of the forest forever. I have a whole collection of such special people." Davis sat in a cold interrogation room, lit only by a desk lamp, a classic setting that hadn't changed in decades. His hands, clutching a paper cup of coffee, were visibly shaking. "At the time, I thought he was just a weird guy. You know, places like this are full of eccentric hermits," the witness continued. "But the way he looked at me, his eyes were kind of blank, like a doll's. I canceled my trek, and when I read about the missing biologist a week later, I should have said something, but—" "Why were you silent for 13 years?" Rodriguez asked, professionally hiding the rising tension. "I was afraid," Davis answered simply. "I was in trouble with the law, overstayed my visa. I thought I was going to be deported. And then it was too late. Who would have believed it? But when I saw those drone photos, the circle of bones, I couldn't keep quiet anymore." In parallel with the witness interview, the FBI crime lab completed a fingerprint analysis of the recovered fingerprints on the old field flask found near Daniel's backpack. The result appeared on Rodriguez's computer screen at 15:47, a match in the federal database. Harold Sheppard, 57 years old, serving a 6-month sentence as a young man for trespassing and vandalism in Oregon. It was at that point that the disparate pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Rodriguez recalled in an interview for the documentary Trail of Bones a year later. Sheppard is a former park ranger who knows all the trails, the man with the scar in the photo, Davis's testimony, the prints on the flask, and most importantly, the triangular geologic tool used to deliver the fatal blows. The FBI's analytical team put together a psychological profile of the suspect in 40 minutes. Classic organized criminal sociopath with elements of ritualistic behavior, the report read. High intelligence combined with sadistic tendencies and lack of empathy. Probably perceives himself as the guardian of the forest, with the right to decide who is worthy of being in it. Extremely dangerous, and probably does not act impulsively. Subsequent verification revealed that after his discharge from the National Park Service, Sheppard purchased a remote cabin 9 miles east of the park boundary in a rugged valley at the foot of the Cascade Mountains, deliberately avoiding modern technology and official contact, noted the investigative team's report, presented at an FBI briefing on May 15th at 16:00. Sheppard's cabin was located on a 2-acre lot surrounded by century-old pine trees. The only way to it was a narrow trail, sometimes lost among rocks and dense undergrowth. The perfect place for someone looking to escape society. A joint task force, including specialists from the FBI, Washington State Police, and National Park Rangers, deployed covert surveillance. 7 camouflaged high-definition cameras and 4 directional microphones were set up around the perimeter of the site. "We operated in complete radio silence," recalls Special Agent Jeremy Cole. "Sheppard is a former ranger. He knows the forest and can spot the slightest signs of human presence. One mistake and the operation is blown." In the surveillance diary kept by Agent Cole, there is an entry dated May 17th, 2240. Subject spends much of his time engaged in the strange activity of carefully placing various objects on makeshift shelves, occasionally talking to them as if they were living beings. Among the items identified is a silver cigarette case that visually matches the description of Daniel Wright's item. It was eerie footage Rodriguez admits. He was stroking these objects, whispering things to them. It was as if they were living beings to him, trophies that he had a relationship with. The decisive evidence was the unusual activity Sheppard discovered during surveillance on the night of May 19th. At 2:37 in the morning, by the light of a kerosene lamp, he retrieved from a hiding place under the floorboards a wooden box upholstered in tarnished copper. Infrared cameras clearly recorded the contents: a copper compass with the initials DR, and a strange tool with a triangular tip resembling a geological hammer, but with a modified handle made of an unusual metal alloy. "I've never seen anything like it," forensic weapons analysis specialist Robert Finch notes in his report. "This tool is handcrafted with the utmost care. The triangular blade perfectly matches the injuries on the victim's skull. But the strangest thing is the alloy it's made of. In addition to the standard components, it's found to contain microparticles of meteoric iron. Where Sheppard got that kind of material is a mystery. The totality of the evidence, including the murder weapon with its distinctive triangular profile, consistent with the injuries on the victim's skull, Daniel Wright's personal effects at the suspect's residence, and witness testimony of his threatening behavior, provides sufficient probable cause for immediate arrest," District Attorney Diane Montgomery concluded, as she signed the warrant for Harold Sheppard's arrest on May 20th, 2024, at 9:15 in the morning. Preparations for the operation took less than 24 hours. "We couldn't take any chances," the tactical team leader explained. "There was a possibility that Sheppard could have had other victims or was preparing for a new crime. Every hour of delay could have cost someone's life." At 9:50 on the morning of May 20th, 24 agents took up positions around the cabin. The forest, which had kept secrets for 13 years, was preparing to reveal another. The 21st day of May 2024, 5:30 in the morning. The Cascade Mountains are shrouded in pre-dawn blue. Around Harold Sheppard's cabin, 24 FBI agents in tactical gear take up positions. In 17 minutes, one of the Northwest's most brutal serial killers will be arrested. In 4 months and 14 days, he will receive 11 life sentences. But some questions will remain unanswered forever. The tactical operation began at exactly 5:30 in the morning with a strategically synchronized infiltration through all possible exits of the structure. The team worked with the precision of surgeons, realizing that any mistake could result in the destruction of evidence or resistance from the suspect. The suspect offered no resistance and was found sitting at a roughly chipped table surrounded by dozens of personal items of missing persons, neatly arranged on makeshift wooden shelves, testified Agent David Hawkins, the task force leader. He stared blankly at a photograph of Mount Rainier and uttered only one phrase: "They're all part of the eternal circle now." The dim light of the kerosene lamp cast long shadows on the walls of the cabin. The air smelled of pine tar and something else, the indefinable odor of lingering misery. Sheppard was wearing a faded ranger uniform, a homemade badge of polished stone with a maze-like symbol engraved on his chest. "The moment of the arrest was surreal," recalls Agent Sarah Corbett, who was involved in the operation. "The man who had committed such heinous crimes looked completely calm, almost peaceful. When we handcuffed him, he looked through us as if we were ghosts." A search of the cabin, which lasted from 6:45 in the morning until 22:20 in the evening, revealed a veritable museum of horror. 11 separate sections with carefully arranged personal belongings, photographs, and fragments of clothing of the missing hikers. In the centerpiece of this macabre display was Daniel Wright's waterproof notebook, decorated with dried lichens collected from the murder scenes. Each item was neatly signed, with the victim's name and the date of joining eternity, forensic scientist Tom Brown's report noted. We found items belonging to people who disappeared in 5 different national parks over a period of 16 years. Some of these disappearances have never been linked. A technical analysis of the cabin revealed an elaborate system of hiding places camouflaged in the walls and under the floorboards. In one of them was found a box containing 11 compasses, one from each victim. Nearby lay a leather-bound diary containing detailed notes on each murder. This wasn't just a documentation of the crimes, commented FBI psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Reiner. It was a kind of religious chronicle. Sheppard saw himself as a conduit between the human world and true nature. Each murder for him was an act of liberation of a chosen soul. At an interrogation on May 23rd at 14:30, the suspect suddenly showed a desire to speak. "I freed the chosen travelers from a temporary existence by transforming them into eternal elements of natural balance through sacred geometric forms," he stated, maintaining an intimidating calm. Sheppard detailed the process of creating ritual circles from human remains at 5 different locations in Olympic, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Crater Lake, and Redwood National Parks. He spoke of his actions with such clinical equanimity as if he were describing a technical process, indicated the interrogation report signed by Special Agent Karen Lamb. Particularly disturbing was his description of the victim selection process. In his words, he recognized the chosen ones by the special glow in their eyes. Daniel Wright was the first one he set free for eternity. The trial, which began on September 27, 2024, in federal court in Seattle, attracted national media attention. The courtroom was filled to capacity with victims' families, journalists, and ordinary citizens eager to see the man who had turned the beauty of the national parks into a hunting ground. The emotional testimony of Emily Wright, sister of the first known victim, was particularly powerful. "For 13 years, I woke up every morning thinking that somewhere my brother needed help, that the authorities were wrong, that he could be saved. Now I know the truth, but I can't decide which is scarier, living in ignorance or knowing what really happened." The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, a record short time for such a complex case. On October 4th, they reached a guilty verdict on all 11 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Marcus Fallon, known for his restraint and impartiality, did not hide his emotions this time as he announced the verdict. "Harold Sheppard, the court sentences you to 11 life sentences without parole. Your actions demonstrate the depth of the human capacity for evil masquerading as a perverted form of spirituality. And while we can isolate you from society, we cannot heal the trauma inflicted on the families of your victims." Sheppard listened to the sentence, maintaining the same nonchalant expression on his face that had not left his face throughout the entire trial. The only movement was a slight smile when the judge mentioned perverted spirituality. Ironically, the exact circle of human remains discovered by the drone, which became the key to solving the crimes, remains an unexplained mystery to the investigation. Forensic experts are still unable to determine how Sheppard managed to place the bones in such a perfect geometric shape in a virtually inaccessible location. "We've looked at every possible way to access the canyon," says geologist Alan Thornton, who advised the investigation. "Even with professional climbing equipment, it's extremely difficult, and to place the remains with such mathematical precision on a nearly vertical surface is physically impossible for one person. The killer himself refuses to explain this aspect of his actions, only smiling enigmatically during relevant questions. "There's something about that smile that makes the blood run cold in your veins," admits one of the investigators, who wish to remain anonymous. "It's like he knows something beyond our comprehension." Today, the eastern portion of Mount Rainier National Park continues to hide the remains of at least 3 of Sheppard's victims, despite a thorough search. This information is based on entries from his diary that mention names of people whose disappearances have never been officially recorded. For many rangers and locals, the area has gained an ominous reputation as a cursed place. New legends say that on particularly quiet nights, whispering voices can be heard listing the names of trails that no longer exist on modern maps. National parks have always been places where people confront the majesty of nature and their own insignificance. Emily Wright reflects on the case in the documentary. "Daniel loved the land, studied it, respected it. It is bitterly ironic that this very land became his grave. But I found comfort in knowing that now he was truly part of the place he loved so much, even if not in the way he might have dreamed." Harold Sheppard's case is closed, but shadows of questions continue to hover over the green peaks of the Cascade Mountains.